Check it out, Irvin Student, Editor-in-Chief and Publisher of Global Brief magazine with you. Micro lecture on Canada's strategic constitution. What is it? Why have I got a football with me? Once was a soccer player. Here we go. Canada has two constitutions, didn't you know? Or two faces of the same constitution. Let me explain. In my last lecture, I formatted Canada as a box, Canada's 4-point game, which ended up being 10 vectors altogether. Here is another metaphor. Canada is a circle. We got a constitution. We know about our internal constitution. We talk about it all the time. It's federalism. It's the Charter. It's the 1867 Constitution Act. And by the way, it's all the Constitution Acts after that and all the Supreme Court interpretations of those various documents, starting with the federal documents and moving to the Charter in the most modern iteration. But it gets much more complex than that, and we have to realize that if we're going to be effective, not only domestically, but especially in the world. And the footballing metaphor is important for the following reasons. When I was a soccer player, much like a boxer today, you punch or you kick with your entire torso, not just with your toe, and you don't punch with your finger, you punch with the entire corpus. Right? And a country like Canada also internationally punches with the entire corpus, or we don't punch at all. So we have a strategic constitution. We've got the internal constitution, which is about justice and order, the justice of Canadian society and the general order of things. Sometimes we call it peace, order, and good governance, and sometimes we call it justice or rights, or the way we conduct ourselves domestically. But internationally, we have a strategic constitution. These things need to be in equilibrium. Otherwise, we are in trouble. And the strategic constitution is about how we project our interests, our values, and get things done for ourselves, but also for the general human condition. So what is Canada's strategic constitution? It is about power. Power not in a moral sense, but power as the ability or the capacity to get anything done, whatever our objective, whatever our end, hopefully for the good. So what is Canadian power? What is our capacity to punch with the torso? We tend to think a bit naively about Canadian power, either that it doesn't exist or that it expresses itself by a single diplomat or a prime ministerial speech, or perhaps as a peacekeeping or even a military mission internationally. Of course, it's much more complex than that and perhaps a little more simple. What are some of the undergirding factors? We mentioned our diplomatic force. We mentioned our military. These are understood. Our economy, our population, not just the mental aspect of the population, but the quantum of the population, the distribution of the population, the talent of the population, our natural resources, our territory, which we covered in the first lecture on Canada's 4-point game, which leads to a 10-vector game, our executive power, the ability of government to move fast and get things done in the national interest when necessary. Education. Not fancied often when we think about strategic power, but it's essential. In a future lecture, we'll talk about languages. How do we prepare Canada to be successful around the world and domestically in respect of linguistic competence? Only through the education function. If we're going to send a diplomat to China or Russia or parts of Africa, we're going to have to prepare them psychologically, culturally, and linguistically. That can only be done through the education function. The education is not a local public school phenomenon. It's central to Canada getting anything done both nationally and internationally. And let me just add transportation and communication as another factor. There are some other ones we may dispute at the margins, but these are the essential undergirdings or scaffolding of power, and they all have relationships betwixt themselves. And so when we think about the Canadian punch, the strategic constitution, I want us to begin to think about it in these more holistic strategic terms. One final note on the strategic constitution. It gets complicated when the strategic constitution and the internal constitution meet. Take again the example of education and languages. Canada does not have, almost uniquely amongst all the leading nations, a national minister of education. So be it. There are deep constitutional reasons and historical reasons for that. But how do we educate a group of people or a national population for performance in the world and for domestic purposes, given our internal constitution, what I call the justice and order construct? How do we prepare it for strategic effect? And therein lies a huge strategic challenge for Canada. I hope to discuss that in future lectures.